You know what? I'm going to disassemble things. This is just to announce that I'm going to disassemble certain things that I've had in progress, just to say there's no more chronology to these, because what I recorded earlier this morning, I just want to upload it. I don't want to have to wait. If I have to wait, it would be the 7th video from here on out. That's how it ended up being. So I've got a lot of stuff from July. I've got a lot of stuff from June, May, even a couple of things from April that I was going to assemble. And then just make sure it's all chronologically neat and tidy. But no, I just realized I have to scrap that, because what I recorded earlier this morning, that can't wait for months, because it would take me months. It absolutely would. I'm just not willing to work hard. I am not tenacious. And I don't feel guilty about any of these things. But throughout all those months that I was leaving these audios that I'm still supposed to assemble into videos, but that will have to wait. One thing I was telling how I was not feeling guilty about all these things. One thing that I did exhibit a degree of guilt for is being first personal. That ends. No more guilt for being first personal. But I am throughout those uploads. But it ends today. Today's July 31st. No more guilt for first personal content. I had to stop. I don't know what that noise was. That wasn't even the train. This is just to announce no guilt for the lack of chronology. Certain things make more sense on the whole if heard chronologically. Certain things will make more sense, but you know what? Once I'm done with all these videos, then maybe you can rewatch them and the whole will come into effect. As it stands, I'm going full-blown rant at the very start of what I recorded earlier today as a standalone video. If you want to hear it in its wholeness, it'll have to be a rewatch after I upload all these other videos. Because I'm thinking as I'm leaving these that I'm at the tail end of some rant. But it ended up just covering so much that's necessary and that I feel like I have to cover and have out in public immediately, that I'm going to scrap the chronology factor. And that I'm picturing it not just at the tail end of a video, but at the tail end of a series of videos that I'm just not serious about getting fast in uploading, because it entails a lot of sacrifice. And so much of what I'm encouraging is a lack of sacrifice for a world, but maybe specifically a society that doesn't deserve it. Don't self-sacrifice. Take it easy. Leisure's your friend. That's kind of old, but you'll hear it in a different way once I've started with this. Maybe I'll throw some other stuff that's kind of semi-recent after it, but I gotta launch into Canada as reserved place first and foremost, because it's hitting me where I live. It's just, this stuff is hitting me where I live. I have a lot of other things that I'm critiquing, but I guess I just have to put out in public Canada as reserved place. It's hit me where it hurts because it's where I live. So this is both first personal and you can say wider, to the extent that you've been able to relate with my audios before. If you're able to relate with the past audios, then you can relate with all this stuff that's coming up. But if you want to be narrow-minded, then just view it as a first personal gripe. But anyway, I'm starting with this. But another huge gripe I have with him that I just realized I never got into, for all the gripes I've got into in the past, on and off, a gripe that I've never gotten into is just, it's just so clear. Sometimes even based on how they use their voice, you can tell, and then you end up being right. You just make these predictions and you end up being right. But there's these other cues in terms of, like, all their life long, they just followed rules excessively. I need to do a separate video on rules. I think I'll title it Canada as a Reserved Place. Canadians often get referred to as a very nice people, and they are, right? That's not a wrong stereotype. They're a very nice people, but they're also an incredibly reserved people. And it's what gets them to just mindlessly and excessively follow rules. And I see it in my colleagues, and sometimes I just make predictions based on how they use their voice, and I end up being so right. Like, these are people who, it's just so clear to me, at no point in their lives did it ever occur to them to ask, like, am I just following too many rules? Like, I'm all for rules when it's about fairness, upkeep, like whether or not I follow a specific rule that is consequential in terms of whether or not fairness is maintained or breached. I'm all too happy to follow one such rule. You know, harm reduction, harm prevention, that as well. Those rules are perfectly fitted to my willingness to comply. So I'm not against all compliance, but so many rules, whether it's in work or outside of work. Outside of work is just these, you know, these no smoking zones. I know a few people who smoke, and it's like, they tell me these stories about, it's Sunday morning, no one's out, they're 1 foot within the no smoking zone. And then it's usually like Pops or Gramps, some old guy's out walking his dog. He's across the street and he spots the smoker just barely stepping into the no smoking zone, and he makes a fuss about it. It's like, I almost wish I were a smoker for those reasons alone, because I would have just such good little zinger insults to any such person who thinks like it's a big deal that on a Sunday morning when no one else is out, that they're pointing out that the smoker is smoking in technically having their 1 foot in the no smoking zone. But this is what I'm referring to, man. Canada as an extremely reserved place where rules are just followed for their own sake. My strata wants me to rent out a bike room in the storage units downstairs. There's a special area for the bike rooms. I just refuse to do it. Like, what, I'm gonna waste $30 a month? Essentially give them $30 a month to rent out a spot specifically so I can put my biking there. They don't want me putting my bike, I have an e-bike now, it's so epic. They don't want me putting it in my storage unit, even though my e-bike fits in the storage unit. No, that's against the law. You can only put your bike in the bike room. And so I don't go downstairs, but I just bring it up. I just bring it up to my place. And I'm not supposed to do that either, because they have cameras downstairs. So if I put it in my storage unit, they're going to see that I didn't put it in the bike storage specifically, because I don't want to give them $30. I've got a perfectly fine storage unit that's technically not reserved for bikes, but I've got nothing else in there, so why shouldn't I just put my bike in there? Why? Can they justify that rule to me? No, they can't. They can't begin to. And so I just bring it up the elevator sometimes, and so every now and then, when I'm in the elevator and I've got my bike, it's sometimes some other person who lives in the building. It's like, you're not supposed to bring your bike upstairs. You're supposed to leave it downstairs. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I've got an empty storage unit, and technically the bike is not reserved for that, so I'm just gonna bring it upstairs, because they can't see that I've got my bike upstairs, because there's no camera in my unit, unlike in the storage areas. And when I just explained, like, I just asked the person while we're in the elevator, it's a very brief encounter, we're both in the elevator, and I just asked him, like, can you justify this rule? Like, what kind of fairness will be breached? What kind of harm will be reduced if I don't comply to that? Is it about fairness? Is it about harm? And the person just looks at me as if I have to justify my mindset, that I'm reaching for these justifications for these rules. Like that, people just don't go there. Their mindset is so just, if there's a rule, just comply to it. Don't ask for the rule makers to justify the rules because it's the strata and we choose to live in the building. Well, I might just choose to not live in this building for that much longer. Well, that's a separate tale that I'll say for, well, the previous audios you've already heard. God, it's hard because I've just recorded so many things and I keep recording so many things. And it's just getting worse. I don't know. I'm gonna have like 6 extremely long videos or more than 6, and then they'll be extremely that much longer. But yeah, I see it with the other tenants in the building I live in. I see it in so many places. Just Canada is this reserved place where people are almost giddy about following rules that have nothing to do with fairness, nothing to do with harm prevention. They're just there to make other people's lives more convenient in some way. And they never think about scrutinizing them and then challenging them so that if enough people challenge them, then those people won't feel entitled to make those rules. But see, people can't just go from step A to step B. Ask questions about why that rule was raised in the first place. There's absolutely no reason that I shouldn't be able to use my own storage that's technically not intended for a bike and just leave my bike there. It's my freaking storage and my bike fits in there. The entitlement, just the entitlement that they think that I should feel like I'm doing something wrong by doing that. They're not getting any money out of me, so yeah. A few times where I do bring I have other places to leave that bike, not in my building, but a few times I choose to bring it all the way to my building, yeah, I'm bringing it upstairs. No apologies. If anything, I should be owed the apology for having to maneuver the bike in the elevator instead of just leaving it in my damn storage downstairs. The audacity! I'm just wondering, like, how many people in the history of these such rules, how many people thought outside the box and went on the offense instead of on the defensive in choosing to not comply with the rules? See, it's not just that I choose not to comply, but I go on the offensive. We need a sort of culture where people go on the offensive. There are rules skeptical insofar as no one can explain to you that the rule is conducive to things like fairness and harm prevention or harm reduction. If they can't justify that, they can't justify the rules. But we live in a zombie, lobotomized culture. So it's like I'm the weird one for asking too many questions. And I'm fed up with it. I'm 37 years old, and all these things are coming to me in a crystal clear way only now, but there were always rumblings. I just for some reason, I just couldn't put it all into terms. So whether I'm complaining about my colleagues who are also mindless in terms of their obedience and compliance, or just these people living in my building, or just these people who think that, if they see a smoker with 1 foot in the no smoking zone on a Sunday morning where no one else is around, they think that, oh, you're breaking the rules, so I'm going to kind of snipe at you. Like this whole freaking place is too reserved for me. I just need to, I don't know, I think I may need societal exile. But the reason I started recording this to begin with is to kind of analogize it. Like, why can't you make any ruptures here? Why can't you change people's minds? Like, realistically, if you've never considered this, but you just heard me articulate all of this, like, I've done a good enough job. See, I don't even need to listen to these audios anymore, whether or not to decide whether I did a decent job. Like, I know I did a decent job explaining this. And realistically, a person who's just open-minded enough, like, that's it. I've sold what I wanted to sell so far in this audio. That people mindlessly obey rules. We shouldn't be nihilists in relation to rules. I've talked about the couple of exceptions for what justifies rules, but that's all I should have to do. I shouldn't have to do anything else. I've made my point perfectly. And yet, how many people do you think I'd actually be able to sway to the point where now they can inhabit my mindset? Not just kind of tepidly agree and kind of leave me feeling doubtful that they enthusiastically agree. No, but truly they enthusiastically agree after they've heard me say what I said, and no further questions asked. And now they'll be as much of a rabble-rouser as I am on these grounds. How many people? Think about the people in your life who are likewise probably giddy and mindless in their own obedience and compliance to rules that can't be justified, that they never even ask justifications for. How many people in your life? Well, I'm thinking, just all my life long, I'm thinking of all the people I knew throughout my whole life. It's like something like 95% of people, I don't expect them to be capable of inhabiting this mindset even after they hear me articulate all this stuff. They're just not capable. So the comparison is to pets and other kinds of, animals that are around the urban areas, right? What is the big difference? The big difference is, are they in their very early lives around people who don't mean them harm? Like maybe the pet owner, right? Do they have exposure to decent people very early on in their life? If they do, they won't be scared of you. I just remember as a kid kind of being perplexed, like, wow, how come these cats that are indoor cats are not afraid of people, and these outdoor stray cats or feral cats, it's like they won't approach a person at all, even if they might be hungry and the person has food for them, they have some treats for them, that cat is still afraid. You cannot untrain the afraid cat to be comfortable with people, just as the pet cat, the indoor cat, you're gonna have to do a lot to it to the point where it becomes as afraid of people as the stray cat is. So this is a critical point. You got to get people when they're young, just as is the case with the animals. TLDR, essentially, is that I view these people who are mindless rule compliers, I see them as the sort of fearful creatures that the stray cat is, for reasons that have nothing to do with
what would actually happen to those stray cats if they actually were comfortable around people who want to just feed them. Because I just remember as a kid, like wanting to feed these stray cats, but they were too afraid of me. And it's like, but those indoor cats aren't afraid of me, but it's all cats. So why is it so different? The difference stems from those very early experiences. The indoor cat was born and raised alongside people. It has no reasons to fear people. It has no reasons to be fearful. These people who are mindless rule compliers, there's something fearful about it. That's what gets it to be truly ignoble. They're fearful. The ignobility stems from their true cowardly nature. And there's just so many forms of strength that nothing in this society will get you to think about. You know, in some ways, society puts emphasis on strength and weakness, both of character, of mind, and of brute physical force. But there's so many ways in which other forms get completely overlooked. It's a weakness to just all one's life long mindlessly obey rules and not ask to have them justified. And it's irrational, just like, though I shouldn't use words like rational and irrational in reference to animals. I'll cheat now and I'll use it once. And I'll say the stray cat is irrational for running away from the person who wants to feed it, whereas the indoor cat, that might be your pet, is not irrational. It trusts you, and it does so for good reasons. That's my analogy. I can't believe this is a 13-minute audio. God. Well, it's add-on time, because now I've listened to it back, so of course that means it's add-on time. Don't even need to point out that I've listened to these audios back. That's how many times I've pointed it out before, but now I'm in Seagullville and Crowville, so enjoy those. But the most important thing to point out, after you've heard me say all this stuff about the mindless rule compliers, is, like, I look at all that and then I see kind of the self-branded political groups, and I think back to all the controversy around the convoy protest surrounding the lockdowns and various COVID restrictions, and just the way these oppositional groups self-brand. It's like, yeah, it is true. They are thinking more critically about some very new, very novel limitations and rules, and how they're thinking that, well, my particular cost benefit doesn't point to the fact that me and mine gain in terms of truly a net gain by restricting ourselves along the lines of these rules. That's kind of half of what the convoy protest was about. They were thinking critically about some new rule, but see, it always needs to be something brand spanking new. They're just mired in status quo bias. And that's fine. I've probably got some status quo biases when I take out the typical mind fallacies that I'm probably to some extent saddled with. I've probably got certain status quo biases of my own. But see, it's just that much more annoying when people who are that much more mired in status quo bias find enough like-minded individuals and on those grounds start up some political group that gets a lot of recognition and that gets the sort of branding where they think that they're the ones who are thinking the most in terms of the value of freedom. Of course, they never take it to personal freedom. It's all these formalistic things that ultimately have to do with what the government wants you to do. They rarely, if ever, think about all the crap your employer wants you to do. And if they are critical about the crap your employer wants you to do, then their solutions are always just as bad. But they romanticize their solutions. Solutions in the way of anti-capitalism. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be so much more giddy about complying to stupid democratic decisions at the workplace as opposed to top-down, quote-unquote, authoritarian decisions at the workplace. Like, no. Every single place I've worked at, it was another kind of pick your poison in terms of, like, if the manager hadn't screwed up and if it had been a democratic process, I'm not going to say every single time, the bottom rung people who would have voted on the decision would have gotten it worse even more, but often enough it would have been just as bad or even worse if it had been a democratic, because you see how many numbskulls are the ones who would have been like the ones who the Marxists and the various other anti-capitalists want you to think that if they're in power to vote on every single decision, things will be better. I'm not so sure that things will be better. But that's just to say that the few people who do think in terms of freedom from some kind of interference, when they incorporate the employer, they just have these formulaic prefixes that have nothing to do with actually resolving the issue, not for those who actually think independently. I'm not going to say it's never going to be the case that would be improved, but often enough in my 19 plus years of being a taxpayer, I've been a taxpayer for 19 plus years. I've been around the block in terms of work. I can't see anything in my work experience that would lead me to believe that if just these people who aren't promoted, if they just had more power to make the decisions happen, work would have been less annoying. No, they would have just fucked up in different ways than the detached, deluded managers do. So yeah, but the regular types, they think they're for freedom. They're not. They're just excessively fixated on this freedom from governmental rules. And that shouldn't be discounted, but that's not the whole story. And that's why I can't even focus. I remember I was just kind of like, what is it about these convoy protests that just, I can't get through a single article. I remember when like everyone was talking about the convoy protests in the winter/spring of 2022. It's just all the punditry was all about this, and I'm like, no, there's something about this that's just pissing me off. It's specifically this. It's that they can catch on certain things here, but only if it's a new rule. If it's something they were born and bred with, born and raised along, they'll just swallow it up. They'll gobble it up. And someone ought to expose them for what they are. They are selective in what they're willing to not comply to. And all their life long, they can't notice it. Because inevitably it would lead to, if their skepticism was truly thoroughgoing, and if their truth-seeking were something other than Cavalier, then they would necessarily notice all the things that I'm noticing here, that I was talking about. The bike crap and the work crap, and just, I can keep going on and on. But they don't notice it because they're not actual seekers. They are mere Cavalier seekers of truth. The rest of the time, they're just social signaling to impress their in-group, their cohorts. And I'm sick of repeating myself about this, but I can't stop repeating myself about the in-group, out-group thing, and how often that just blurs perspective. It blurs perspective. And yeah, I'm going to keep bringing it up until it gets until one of the pundits kind of incorporates that into their toolkit and echoes me. I need to find a pundit with whom I can converse so that the pundit can be my messenger. The convoy protest, it's just crumbs in terms of being skeptical about quote-unquote authoritarianism. No, they catch on to some of it, but it's just crumbs. I'll give you the whole freaking loaf. You listen to me, you get the whole loaf. With them, you only get the crumbs. Like there's some new lockdown and like we're going to be super skeptical about that. Well, maybe that's justified. Or at least for certain types of people, yes, it's a net loss if you comply. But for people like me, that's just one of many other things that drags me down, societally speaking. Society, it's just never been so much more clear. Society benefits from me far more than I benefit from them. From it. Society is parasitic on me, and I need exile. So this has to go in as well as an add-on. At one point I say, the pundit, I want to sway the pundit to be my mouthpiece, essentially, and to bring my agenda to the public square in the way of putting emphasis on the in-group, out-group divides and how they, whatever other merits and demerits exist, one thing we know it does is it blurs perspective. I think I put it in those kinds of ways. I said at the end, when I brought up briefly in this video the in-group, out-group splits, and how discourse gets mired in them, I said what it does is, one thing we know it does, it's been proven beyond anything else, it's been proven that it blurs perspective, is how I put it. And then I said, I want a pundit to be my mouthpiece, because I want the pundit to bring this, to emphasize this out in the public square, so people are more mindful of it. I realized that it has been emphasized in the public square. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean mere emphasis, and then let's move on to being excessively focused on the issues themselves. No, I'm saying emphasize it and then hang on it and then point out how instead of partisan takes, truly, instead of the partisan takes being where we cheer or jeer, not we, they, because I don't, instead of the partisan takes being where something is cheered and jeered, and here I can say partisanism beyond politics, just mere ideological partisan storytelling. Instead of that being where people cheer or jeer in public, shower people with praise or cast blame on them, along the lines of some ideological partisan lens. No, it needs to be the extent to which people show themselves to exhibit this and therefore show themselves to fail to realize that it blurs perspective. Those who do realize that it blurs perspective and are cautious of it, that itself needs to be the placeholder, or at least the replacement for the partisan cheer-jeer mechanics. Right now we have a partisan cheer-jeer mechanics, and it needs to be replaced. It can't just be replaced by one thing, but one of the biggest ingredients, I believe, needs to be this awareness that the in-group, out-group divides. The in-group doesn't have to be similar to you along the lines of any immutable characteristics. Here we're talking strictly attitudinal and other kinds of things, but that doesn't mean that I'm taking back what I said about post-impartialism. I'm still post-impartial. That is a different type of thing. But the kinds of in-group, out-group solidarity vibes you need to be wary of. The extent to which you are shown to be successful at being skeptical of it, that itself should endear you in some way to your interlocutors. Now, that itself need not become a partisan thing itself. That's where the tricky part becomes. It should endear you to it, but nonetheless, we're not going to get groupy about the fact that we all identify as people who recognize to a sufficient extent that in-group, out-group divides blur perspective. That doesn't mean we're going to get groupy ourselves and organize to affect something in life. It just means that there's a proper kind of tone to our conversation, not found among the tone of the conversation with those who are still spellbound by in-group, out-group along the partisan lens. And certainly along the lens of immutable characteristics. There's no shortage of those people either, of course. Those are the lowest of the low. Those who still get gushy over words like patriotism and feel that it's healthy to have a national identity. You may have every other identity. If you lack the national identity, there's something unhealthy about your psyche. The more national identity you feel, the more... So it's just again, just taking happenstance and building statutes to it, psychic statutes to it. That's your national identity, but that's supposed to be healthy. But then even those in-group, out-group divides that have nothing to do with immutable characteristics and similar such happenstance. In-group, out-group divides based on your most cherished beliefs. You can be nice to people who share your conclusions, but the moment you start organizing along the lines and thus influencing the punditry along those lines too, right? Don't you see? Like, I just need one pundit who's very visible, who pounds on this and says we should not bestow esteem. In whatever other way we choose to not bestow esteem on others, at the top of that list, there's people who are still so spellbound by the partisan, ideological, wider sense partisan, in-group, out-group divides. We need to give a big old yuck, a public square yucks to this beyond any other kinds of specific conclusions. That sounds extreme. Yes, it sounds very extreme. But we're just at a spot right now where, as a short-term strategy to crawl our way out of this zombie, lobotomized partisan space, whether it's political or non-political partisan space, that will have to be at least the short-term strategy. So where's the pundit who's willing to have me be there? They're my mouthpiece and I'm in their earpiece. That's what really needs to happen. This is yet another arrogant thing, but that's what I truly believe. Well, this is a first. I have just had a 7+ minute audio disrupted and therefore lost because of a scammer call. I say scammer call, I don't know, maybe it wasn't, but I can't unlock my voicemail, so I can't hear the silly voicemail they left you. But back in the day when I could unlock my voicemail, every time it was one of these mainland China, that itself was proof that it was a scammer call. And I guess I all but half proved that it's a scammer call because it did say mainland China. I just can't unlock my voicemail box to hear what stupid little foreign language message they left me, but they disrupted what I think was shaping up to be a pretty damn good audio, 7+ minutes. And so I gotta see if I can hack my phone so that it can be overridden. Because these scam calls, I don't know how I've never even complained about them before. This is another kind of overlooked nuisance in the world, the modern world. And I just think in the last couple of months they've spiked. I've asked a couple of people, they said they've been getting in more too. It's not just me. Scammer calls are more frequent, and this is the first time that they've disrupted something that I consider very important, like my audio. And so I've got to figure out how they can't override things like this, because I am trying to maintain composure, but I'm quite furious that I lost the audio, that this was even possible, that any random caller can override when you're recording your phone audio. I guess I just got to spend more time in settings. I hate going to settings. Triggers my OCD. I just see so many things that I'm not usually familiar with, and I'm like, oh, let's explore all of this, but then you're not doing what you need to do, or what you think you need to do, like editing. But this is just to say, this is one reason I can't relate to these, I'm the politician who relates to the people. I can't relate to these glad-handing politicians because I never feel like I can go up to a politician and say, hey, can you help me hunt down the scum, the caller display, mainland China scum that disrupted my audio and that keeps bugging me? Can you help me hunt this person down and then set up a system where we can legally whip them? And maybe try to convince the people that you're so eager to relate to and have a cold one with, convince them that we're not morally odious for wanting to do this, and that these scammers maybe do deserve exactly that in a legal and in a morally permissible context. Well, where's the politician who's giving the sort of stump speech that'll cater to me, where I want to hunt down and whip the scum, the scammer, in all likelihood, scammer scum, with the call display mainland China, leaves me voicemails every time. There's other kinds of call displays that are even weirder that have ruined my audio. Can we hunt them down and whip them? And kind of in public settings, like used to be done in the past, but for horrible things that the whipped weren't actually guilty for? Can we set up that whip thing? And God, now this may get taken down because now I'm condoning violence. But this is kind of a comedic bit, but it packs some punch. Can we just whip the scammers, scam callers? Whoever set up the automated way of it, it's all automated, but there's still people who, there was intentionality behind the automaticity. Like, I know it doesn't require an actual human being to dial the numbers, but nonetheless, there is intentionality behind the automaticity. And that intentionality needs a good old whipping. So where's the politician who's going to cater to me and say, yeah, let's go track him down and whip him legally? No, they don't care about that. Most people are probably annoyed by this more than you hear in the public square. It's just one of the many things that just gets overlooked by these rule followers. And yes, it's still July 31st, and I just can't stop talking. But yeah, I'm going to throw another thing in from a semi-recent date, maybe yesterday, but I'll see what I want to throw in on top of this. There was audio I recorded complaining about the voice factor, how predictive the voice factor is. So I think I'm just going to throw that in, because I mentioned the voice thing earlier on when I was talking about the rule followers. But then I said more things about the voice thing in previous audios. So let's just proceed to that. God, with this one, I don't even have a point, but I just have to say it. People who spend very little time discussing impersonal issues. They're discussing something with enthusiasm. They're discussing their personal issues of their friends. It can be in the form of grievances or joys or whatever it is, or just whatever they're studiously interested in for these studious material ends. That may rouse their interest, but those who spend very little to no time talking about the impersonal, the ideal, things of that sort, the global. They see only the particular in the particular. They don't see the universal in it. That's how Shaw put it. Those types of people, it's a tell. Why is it always a tell? The moment you hear them talk, you can tell. No, that's at best a noob. They don't take this stuff seriously. I don't take it seriously to the point where I devote all of my life into it. If I devoted my life to it, I'd never enjoy myself. I'd give up on stuff like music. I'd devote myself to philosophy. I don't mean to posture too much about this. I know I'm nowhere near 100%. I'm just saying, those who are at like 10 or below percent in terms of the amount of time of their waking hours they devote to the impersonal and the ideal, those who are like significantly 10% or lower, there's a tell right away. It's how they use their voice. They put on a very different voice when it's time to. It's almost like they go into Dan Rather broadcast mode. When you get them off their normal buzz, you get them start thinking about even some mundane public-spirited issues. They'll immediately put on what they think is the appropriate voice. If they're airing an opinion that's not even that controversial, they'll just put in this Dan Rather cautious. Maybe they'll clean up their sentences a little bit because their sentences are otherwise so sloppy. I don't have a point to this. I just felt like doing a little survey. Am I the only one? I can't be the only one who always felt there was a tell, but you just couldn't put your finger on it. I blazed, and so I just put my finger on it. Figured it's worth recording. But there's no point. I just want to see if anyone else has spotted it. It's how they use their voice. And it's the worst change when they use an otherwise screechy, raunchy vocal fry. Oh, then it's a really bad combo. Because they've so mastered the art of the vocal fry that the moment they try to fuse it with Dan Rather, ooh, I don't know, it's like chili Pepsi or something. So this video has to go up. This video has to go up. It's the 21st of July. I've been sitting on it. I've mostly finished it now for days. It has to go up. I cannot add this, what I'm doing right now, to this video that you see right here. Because it's done. It's about to be exported. But nonetheless, I just caught something about it that may seem that was intentional, but I swear to God, this wasn't intentional. And I've heard it so many times, this part of the video, and nonetheless, I only caught the connection now. It's strange how sometimes connections, it's as if I'm doing a gag, but I swear to God, it just ended up that I chose this image when I said pretty much what seems like his catchphrase, like one of the Hulkster's catchphrases. You'll know it when I replay it. I wonder if any of the commenters will pick up on it, but listen to this.
If you're one such person, just so you know, I'm aware of all those added layers to nihilism, the bootstrap issue, essentially just to kind of stay pejorative right now in terms of nihilism, the so-called dilemma of, normative need for normativity. What you gonna do now? It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna do much about it.
Yeah, when I was recording that audio for the first time, I didn't even know that the second half of the video would be a wrestling thing. Much less that I would have a wrestling image with Hogan as I'm saying, what you gonna do? I don't know why I feel it's important to mention this right now. I know I'm not gonna loop this into the video itself, but at some point, probably the video following up with it, yeah, I didn't know I was gonna do the what you gonna do thing. It's just, I know it's not majestic or anything like that. It's just purely coincidental, but I just felt the need to record it and to point out that I didn't intend for that to happen. Well, of course, now that I'm watching the video that I uploaded yesterday, that I uploaded on the 21st, now being the 22nd, I'm just watching it and I caught something. Well, I recorded the one thing I caught visually that you saw. I'm probably going to put this immediately after. I recorded that on the day, just before I uploaded the damn thing. But right now, the audio you're hearing is, I just caught something that's more substantive that I want to just correct, that I really should have made clear. But I'm going to play myself for just a few seconds. I just want to make sure I landed at the right spot here. So yeah, I think I'm going to play just the requisite amount, and then I'm going to chime in. I wish that it was still yesterday so I can just include this in that damn video, because this is important. It's very early on. I'm talking about ideality of time stuff.
The moment you go down the rabbit hole of portraying time, space as forms and therefore limitations of our intelligence, you gotta forswear so much else in terms of conclusions. And Chop argues for all these things, and all these things may well be true. It's just I haven't taken a deep dive into Kant. I've done so directly somewhat, but mostly indirectly, and certainly not comprehensively. But Chop says, separate the wheat from the chaff as those who have and have not read Kant. This ultimate formulation of idealism, which Chop didn't think was perfect, but which he thought was stellar, and far more particular than that of Berkeley's.
Okay, that's the most important thing. So obviously it's, on the one hand, I'm saying I'm in some way validating Chop's praise of Kant, even though I'm fessing to the fact that I haven't read this work. That's where so much of the force behind my agnosticism stems from. It's a conception of agnosticism as to the justification of the view, not necessarily our or any human's inability to arrive at a more substantive, non-agnostic or post-agnostic view. I'm not just saying because I think agnosticism is necessary in my case and in anyone else's case who hasn't read the works of Kant. Schopp goes into here in his long criticism section. Like, if you haven't read Kant directly, then you, like me, need to have a kind of agnosticism as it relates to the concept of epistemic justification, not other kinds of positive epistemic states, like actual insight into the truth. There are certain people who, if they've read all these works and they've truly absorbed them, they might absolutely have insight into the truth. Not everyone has to be an agnostic. But if we just think about it in each person's kind of personal justification standard, in my case, until I plow through all this Kantian stuff, agnosticism is warranted for me, and I think it's warranted for just about everyone who I converse with on these matters. But, maybe they can correct me. Maybe they've read Kant comprehensively as well as directly. So I just wanted to add that. I wish I could add this. I wish it was still yesterday and I went back and started editing the video again and just making sure to include this part. I hate sirens. Maybe I've mentioned that once or twice. More at 11. It's quite amusing. There is a audio from June 12th. I announced in the audio that it's June 12th that I recorded it on. And I reference this latest round of Trump indictments. And I'm so damn sluggish. I intended to upload it, but I'm just so damn sluggish. It's been that long since then that now there's yet another round of the latest Trump indictments that makes that audio seem passé. But I figured if I just record this as a prelude to it and acknowledge that I realize it's passé, then it's still justified to upload that audio. So that's what I'll just follow up with right now. I was talking about the latest round of indictments against Trump on June 12th, and now there's been yet another round of indictments. And so you can see how this Trump stuff is evergreen. Even if you sit on it and it's passé, there's something that very much resembles it, however much later you choose to eventually get around to uploading it. But everything I say about those rounds of indictments applies to this round of indictments. And I say pretty much at the beginning of the audio that the details are, here the devil is not so much in the details of the particularities of the issues. It's more about, well, you'll see what it's more about as I get into it right now. Another audio. Yeah, I'm not going to organize these into separate videos. It's just going to be a giant, 5-hour long video. No coherence at all, but yeah, this will probably be the last one. It's June 12th. The U.S. is reeling, and even more so than it's usually reeling because of this last round of indictments against Trump. I'm not here to talk about any of those details because I don't care enough about the details, and neither should you. You got to read all these acts to really know what's what. These very long acts, and kudos to you if you have read them. What precisely can or cannot the president do with specific documents? Where can he take them? Where can he not take them? All those details, again, as with many other things that are very topical and buzzy, all those details, I doubt people are intrinsically motivated to know the ins and outs of them. They just know it's what everyone else is concerned with, and they want those communal vibes, as I said in a previous video. But, like I said, America's reeling, and we're reeling here too because America's reeling. And so there's what I'm going to refer to as sanctimony. There's a lot of sanctimony coming from Team Blue. Team Red is just batshit crazy kind of ire and fury, which is par for the course. But there's a bit more sanctimony coming from Team Red, and I just want to remark on it. This is not a new thing I'm going to remark on here, but admittedly, I am salty at this because no one's even spotting how sanctimonious they seem when you pay attention to the sort of stuff that I'll often bring up in videos, right? And so that is the fact that we evolved, and we evolved to fear specific things, and one of the things we evolved to be petrified of is being outcasts. And so really, all of you people who just still can't believe that so many of the MAGAs are still with him, this is really where the sanctimony comes in. It's so nauseating. You thought that this time the line would have been crossed. I'm not saying this is some majority of Team Blue who believe this, but I'm just seeing it. they're flabbergasted. Like, even now, they're threatening violence. Of course they're threatening violence. Of course they're going to do every single thing they can to defend to the death, literally, what they've been willing to defend since day one, going back to 2015. This was obvious. You can see that this was just, these rallies, this is just the will being etherealized and sublimated. It's not about the issues. It was never about the issues. It's about the vibe they get. And it's not everyone who can pull off that type of vibe. It's certain kind of performers and certain kinds of demagogues. If politics were about the issues themselves, local politics and at least state level politics would be the sort of things that are discussed far more often than not. You know, people say, this impacts me, so obviously I'm going to care about it. And yeah, there's somewhat of a connection between these federal issues, national issues. There's some kind of a through line sometimes, and what is permitted or not permitted at the state and local level. But by and large, especially a country like America, you get a lot of autonomy at the state and local level. So if the justification for being that into politics is things impact me personally, clearly all these federal issues would not be where the buzziness is. Right? And it would be hard to even identify any kind of political buzziness, because what would be motivating is those things at the state and local level, which, if you really think about how much of the political impacts your life, the majority of it is that which is state and local. Here, provincial and local, but in the US, state and local. And that matters because everyone really thinks this is about the issues. It's not about the issues. It's about symbolic value, and it's about belongingness. And so just as I said before in the past, that we don't do sex ed right, we're just nowhere near getting into the factual depth of the matter. Likewise, we don't do civics right. We don't do a lot of things right. God, I gotta stop saying we. I can't believe I just did it. In so many of the other audios that you probably hear before this one, I catch myself saying we and correct myself, but I just did it again. What really disgusts me is the cowardly nature of it. We're just not comfortable telling kids that it's repugnant and ignoble to have that concern. Whoops. So I'm actually in the cubicle area, so I gotta talk a little quieter because I'm hearing footsteps. I didn't want to step out. But I can't wait till I get out. I'm just so full of piss and vinegar. I can't wait till this shift is done for me to actually start doing audios. I gotta do this audio right now, but I'm just kind of checking to see if the coast is continually clear. It is absolutely repugnant that we can't just sit kids down and say, you evolved to have this need for belongingness, and if it goes unscrutinized, if you just embrace it, it's gonna lead to this. It's going to lead to an absolute inability for the country that is technologically more sophisticated than any other country should be a country where discourse, political discourse, any other kind of discourse is the easiest. Technology really should make this easier if you've been set on the right path very early on. Rationality boot camp is what I think not just kids need, but adults. But with adults, it's too late. But yeah, what is kind of the ABCs of rationality boot camp? First thing they should tell you is every single one of you evolved, thus you have a burning desire to belong. And it's going to get you in a lot of trouble because you're going to conflate the accidental for the essential. Because you're not going to see what's truly tugging on you. Nothing else explains why they're still with him, apart from the fact that, pardon me, I got disrupted. I said nothing explains why they are with him, apart from the fact that they're a little too unskeptical about their skeptical faculties. They're not skeptical enough about the skeptical faculties they do have. I think it's a decent way to put it. And then nothing else explains why the Blues, Team Blue, as I like to derisively call them, Team Blue, nothing else explains their puzzlement, other than the fact that they too don't put enough emphasis on the fact that when it comes to certainly the federal issues, it's not about the issues themselves. It's about signaling. It's about belongingness. It's about what surely can be identified and diagnosed when it's happening somewhere far away. Israelis and Palestinians, cowboys, Indians. What else we got? I've seen this because I kind of grew up alongside this when it comes to Serbs and Croats. Certainly we see now Ukrainians versus Russians. There's been so many of these, people just get carried away. They think the group factor is more than it is. And even though I'm sure the typical American who is newsy and follows the headlines and all that stuff, they know all too well. Like if I tell them, is at least a part of the Middle Eastern conflict, specifically with, let's say, Palestinians and Israelis, the fact that they're just a little too gushy over their own in-group and thus there's antagonism toward the out-group, does that not at least blur perspective to a degree that's significant enough to keep commenting on it? I'm sure that the typical American who keeps up with the news, they'll say, yes, but somehow they forget themselves when it's a matter of MAGA versus anti-MAGA. I'm not going to say red versus blue because there are enough reds who are anti-MAGA. It's just they believe they have to be strategically anti-MAGA, and that itself that's a different tale for a different day as to why they don't just come out and say what they believe. The responsible pundit. There have been a few. George Will. I guess in terms of the politicians themselves, Romney has always been outspoken about how anti-MAGA he is. So there are the departures from the norm. Kind of David Frum almost predicted MAGA with some of the books he's written in the wake of that 2012 election. But even before that, David Frum was writing books about how the quote-unquote conservative coalition in the U.S. it's a very raggedy coalition and need to clean up their act. So there have been these people, but by and large, people are just tiptoey. You can just clearly see someone like Carrie Lake. You can just see every single move is calculated to be ginger and tiptoey because she wants to court enough of the MAGA because she's worried about poll numbers. Because of course she's worried about poll numbers. She's a politician. That's kind of step A as to why you shouldn't want to be a politician. If you got a mind and you want to use it in public, you can't be a politician. You can't run for office or anything that's even, in the periphery of running for office. But yeah, people who are knee-deep into this, like those who attend MAGA rallies and who can be, you can see them cheering. You can see them getting swept up the way wrestling fans get swept up at a wrestling show. You can see them getting wrapped up during the rallies themselves. It's about enjoying the showmanship. And I guess when you have a self-awareness of it, it's fine, but I don't think many in those crowds have a self-awareness of it. I also don't think the typical reader of The Atlantic has a self-awareness of the group dynamics and how much they predominate in all this. Because they just keep discussing the issues a little too much for my taste, and they need to go back to brass tacks. Brass tacks is get over this idea that being a social being is a good thing, because this is exactly the kind of trouble it gets you in. I said late in the audio where I was disrupted that it's going to get you in trouble. Of course I meant it's going to get you in epistemic trouble. Not necessarily the sort of trouble that's going to reflect badly on your real aims, but certainly your ideal aims. Yeah, it's absolutely going to get you in trouble. You're not going to have ideal aims because you're going to think as long as enough people, enough clapping seals from your own in-group clap at the things you want them to clap at, that's all you have to be satisfied about. You don't have to be dissatisfied about all the jeering that takes place when you're not on your home turf, because you can just pretend that those people are all pathological and that it's not just that there are earnest differences ideologically, but they believe something different because they're pathological at their core. It's like, oh, how convenient. It's just flattery. And just so many people, so many of the prostitutes is what I like to call them. I love the term prostitutes. So many of the prostitutes take advantage of that. Truly the kind of rogue pundits. They just take advantage of that. And then they use flattery instead of having to be actually persuasive on intellectual grounds. And kind of maybe reverse flattery. You don't have to directly flatter your listeners. You just have to say enough things about the outgroup and why they are pathological. Not just they see things differently, but they just see things differently precisely because of their own immutable defects. And so they can't be spoken with. So if they jeer you, you don't have to worry about that. As long as your in-group's cheering you, that's all that matters. But yeah, if you're outside of it, it becomes so clear. This is why being an outcast, misanthrope, or I think even just like a couch potato is advantageous, epistemically speaking. Because just as we have more of a sober view, not being in the Gaza Strip, not being in the Middle East, we can see just the nothingness of the Sunni-Shia beefs or the Israeli-Palestinian beefs. Maybe not nothingness, but we see how people forget themselves. Likewise, with what are the examples that I use historically? There's Cowboys, Indians, Serbs, Croats. I'm more understanding toward Ukrainians right now, if they get wrapped up in it, than I would be at any other period, because they're having their lives, just their country decimated. So I'm more understanding toward them, because it's kind of, Putin's just going next level militarist. So yeah, I shouldn't have used that example. That example can be construed as disrespectful for what's taking place right now in Ukraine, in the whole region. But, before, when you think about it, even after 2014, I was thinking, like, why is it that big a deal? Why is it because you want trade? You want trade with the West? Does it really make that much sense to poke the bear when you know the bear is irrational? You can say it's courageous, but if it's for these, economic ends, then I don't know. But I need to save my whole anti-economics screed for some other time. But yeah, it's important for them to have their Ukrainian identity. And I was like thinking, like, as long as it's not someone like Putin at the helm, would it really matter? Just think in terms of that non-parochial, not kumbaya cosmopolitan perspective, but simply the non-parochial perspective. It doesn't have to be, you have to be a rainbow style cosmopolitan. But it's just, you just gotta not care if there's now just this fluidity between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's kind of, some of this heritage stuff is lost. If you're the individual, it's not going to matter to you. The true individual, it's not going to matter to you that some of the heritage is lost. Just like in the case of the MAGAs. If this thing you call America, that is a Rorschach test, we see all the different ways. People can tell long stories about what America is really about. Long, mutually exclusive stories about, and not just mutually exclusive, but truly contradictory. You can spin a long narrative, you can find enough facts to support it, and yet it'll contradict a wholly different narrative about what America truly is, that is likewise supported by its own set of facts. And like, to me, I just see all this. It's been so clear for years. You study American history, it's not just the fathers that had radically different views, but even the precursors to that, the precursors to the motivation for why they had to flee and go to the new world. And atop all that, you're going to tell me that the word America should make you gushy or make you in some way antagonistic? No, it shouldn't. All you should be able to see America for is the giant Rorschach test that it is. But look how much mileage, from Trump to all his underlings, look how much mileage they get in terms of persuasion just by saying, we're not going to have a country anymore. Like, how is it still, like maybe in early 2015, when it came down the escalator, a little bit of mileage for it, okay. The immigration issue, okay. Border integrity, okay. But this gushiness over a word that, like, how can anyone live in public life? How can anyone pay attention to the way people argue in public and think that it's something other than a Rorschach test? Because they're just that low resolution. And I have no stomach for it. Whether it's Team Red versus Team Blue, whether it's Cowboys, Indians, no matter what it is, it's just so sad that a person has to step outside of it to see just how much the group dynamic in and of itself impedes on the analysis. You shouldn't care about this stuff. And I have this whole other thing about what makes a virtuous civic agent, and how it's, the more you think about it, the more parochial you do have to be a virtuous civic agent. But I have to save that for some other rant because it's a whole different rant. Essentially, I am not willing to make any kind of trade-offs between just my analytical chops and me being the most virtuous civic agent I can be. Because I just have to be too parochial to be properly virtuous in terms of my civic performance. And I've just given it up. I do nothing in terms of local politics. Canada has had one of the most scandalous years in terms of both its federal, but then even some of the stuff that's going on here in BC. And all I'm doing is just glancing at headlines because I'm thinking higher. And I'm just thinking like, it's happenstance. The fact that I live here and that therefore I vote here and my vote matters here but not elsewhere. Like if my mind is elsewhere, that's where I'm gonna put my energies too. My vote be damned. Yeah, I don't vote. It would be irresponsible for me to vote because I just don't spend that much time immersing myself into local issues. So I understand. I'm not a virtuous civic agent, and that's fine, because the cost to it, the opportunity cost to it, would be too great. And now I'm just thinking of a channel like Kraut. He does these videos, like he thinks he's informing the people by doing these videos in all these different countries. I think he's stuck to a lot of this, European dilemmas and stuff like that, and that's all fine to know, but don't think for a second that those people who watch these videos are then going to do something useful with that knowledge. It's just kind of nice to know, to be the international-minded person. It's nice to know, but yeah, in terms of them as voters, they can't put that to good use at all. Just this last little bit, back to July 31st now, just got to add one thing quick. In the prostitutes, MAGA sucks, but everyone else is too groupie as well. In that audio, at one point, there's a visual correction, but I can't even urge watching this video. I'm gonna go thinner on the images than I normally do. So I don't even urge watching this video. It's fine to even listen to it, but there was one kind of critical visual correction where I didn't think to cover my basis on one point, and I realized that listening back, I said I cut, for example, Ukrainians a lot more slack for being groupie right now. In a way, I don't cut all these other groups because of what's going on in Ukraine. But realistically, previously I mentioned, these groupie beefs in the Middle East. And though we can't say that there's a single Middle Eastern country that's being attacked the way Ukraine is attacked, nonetheless, I know that when it comes to a lot of the Sunni Shia and so on and so forth, intra-Middle Eastern beefs, yeah, people are having their lives decimated as well. So I don't want to sound like I'm tone deaf on that. Not even tone deaf. I don't want to sound like I'm oblivious to that. So at that part of the video where I say I cut Ukrainian slack, I haven't inserted the exact writing of it, but I know I need to for when the video goes up. I'll say, actually, this also applies to many of the other people who live in kind of war-torn or quasi-war-torn regions. If you get kind of fanatically groupie because someone literally kills your family or other people you care for, loved ones, and they're from that out-group, that kind of zeal, you probably still shouldn't feel it, but if you do, I'm not going to say it's as bad as kind of the typical American who feels it, because we're not going to have a country anymore, as I said it. I'm getting a little more kind of voice. I'm letting loose in terms of just doing mock voices these days, unapologetically. But this audio is just to say, I can't urge watching this video. There's not that much visually interesting as there was with previous videos. I may even start incorporating like stock footage. I'll see some kind of insulting stock footage that I'm going to use to save myself some time from looking up images. But this is just to say, if you only listened, I understand. It's not just Ukrainians who should be cut slack in terms of getting a little too zeal happy in terms of in-group, out-group divides. There's other examples for that as well. So you will have seen that if you actually watch the video, but it's a visual only correction. So I'll do the audio correction as well, but at the end of the video, because I don't want to disrupt the flow. I like my audio flow. Okay, that's it.